Once upon a time, there lived in Liyue Harbor a beautiful blue-haired girl who fluttered the hearts of men across all Teyvat and beyond. She was so beautiful, in fact, that the horny overlords above decided to bless her with the most formidable kit ever given to a Hydro Vision holder at the time. The people were understandably ecstatic when it was eventually revealed that this beautiful girl actually had two sisters of comparable appeal. The genetic similarities between the identical triplets did not merely extend to the appearance. It was only natural that the two sisters also possessed talents and abilities of comparable form and magnitude. Ladies and gentlemen, sit tight today as we make the long-awaited comparison between the three premier off-field Hydro characters in Genshin Impact: Xingqiu, Yelan, and Furina. For nearly 2 years before Yelan's release, Xingqiu was well respected as the sole unit that reliably applied Hydro from off-field at a fast pace and with great uptime. Xingqiu's Hydro application, often seen as the highlight of his kit, is invaluable to all teams with pyro damage dealers that vape a significant portion of their damage, as well as in a vast array of transformative damage teams ranging from EC Swirl, Hyperbloom, Nilou, etc. However, Hydro application is far from the only useful attribute in Xingqiu's kit. He also possesses a rather impressive personal damage profile, which was further enhanced by the release of the emblem set, among other things. However, Xingqiu's main defining feature that differentiates himself from his siblings has got to be his trademark defensive utility. Throughout the duration of his rain swords, Xingqiu reduces the damage taken by your on-fielder and grants them with a layer of resistance to interruption. Oh, and he also technically heals you a little bit, but the resistance to interruption is definitely the highlight of his defensive capabilities. To recap, Xingqiu provides fast off-field Hydro application with high uptime, significant personal damage, and very convenient defensive utility. All of these features combined firmly cement Xingqiu as one of the best units in the entire game. While everyone immediately understood that Yelan was an exceptional unit, her comparison with Xingqiu has always been a polarizing topic. On one hand, there were those who saw the big numbers on Yelan's burst and immediately went, "Oh my god, she's broken," and naively assumed that she was just superior to Xingqiu in every way. On the other hand, people hyper-fixated on her lower Hydro app, shorter uptime, and that she lacked defensive features, while completely ignoring her offensive contributions and labeled her as just worse. Unfortunately, due to the oversaturation of YouTube content that highlight niche, transformative damage-oriented Dendro teams in the past bit, this narrative has gotten more prevalent than it deserves to be. Here are the actual facts in this comparison. Yelan's burst lasts for 15 seconds as opposed to Xingqiu's 18 seconds. She also applies fewer instances of Hydro in that duration. This means that she will not enable as many blooms, for example, in teams where that is meaningful. If your team depends heavily or solely on transformative damage, Yelan may be a strict downgrade. However, Yelan's Hydro app is fast enough to enable most interactions properly regardless. For example, a C0 Yelan can still allow Hu Tao to vaporize all of her charge attacks consistently, contrary to popular belief. I have no idea where the strange take that Yelan cannot fully enable Hu Tao came from, but just know that it is simply incorrect. Yelan also lacks Xingqiu's defensive utility, and there will inevitably be scenarios where you feel more vulnerable when using her instead of Xingqiu, especially in teams with no other defensive options. However, in exchange for defensive utility, Yelan offers one of the strongest offensive passives in the game. Her A4, Adapt with Ease, grants an unconditional 30 to 35 damage % bonus to your active character on average. Furthermore, Yelan has a slightly shorter burst cooldown and a much shorter skill cooldown than Xingqiu. This allows you to either shorten your rotations or to perform 2 E-skills every rotation, and when you do choose to perform 2 E-skills every rotation, the difference in energy requirement and personal damage between Yelan and Xingqiu begin to show. Here is a practical example that can help you visualize the difference in team DPS between using Yelan and Xingqiu in a team with an on-field DPS who can take advantage of Yelan's passive. As you can see, the damage gain in using Yelan over Xingqiu in this particular Hu Tao team exceeds the benefit of using Staff of Homa over a 4-star weapon. The difference is so great that even if you make significant gameplay concessions like whiffing 2 charge attacks to dodge or getting staggered, the Yelan variant still pulls ahead in damage. Situations like these is where I would consider Yelan the strictly more recommendable option over Xingqiu. There comes a point where you cannot in good faith justify favoring additional defensive utility over vastly superior damage output. After all, you wouldn't really consider using Zhongli over Kazuha in aggravate teams just for his shield. Due to her A4 passive, shorter cooldowns / better energy generation, Yelan is always the superior option to Xingqiu offensively in all teams involving an on-field DPS doing significant talent damage, except for Sino teams. Too much of Sino's damage comes from Hyper Blooms. If you're playing a team where Yelan does not provide an offensive advantage, please just use Xingqiu. You can face tank more things and it's really funny. A wise man once said, if Yelan is a second Xingqiu, then Furina is a second Yelan. The concessions that Furina makes in survivability in favor of more damage are exactly like those that Yelan makes in comparison to Xingqiu. Instead of just buffing your on-field character, Furina drains your team's HP in exchange for a much bigger damage percent buff to the entire party. In order for Furina to function to her fullest, she requires you to alter team building priorities, as she demands a healer in all her teams. And sometimes, that can mean giving up an offensive support if you don't use a healer already. But that doesn't even matter. The damage bonus that Furina gives you when you do satisfy her is big enough to where she's almost always the strongest option anyway. Remember how Xingqiu is better than Yelan in Sino teams due to uptime? Well, Furina's E lasts for 30 seconds, and that in conjunction with her talent damage buff makes her better than both. And in teams where Yelan was previously favorable due to her damage percent bonus, like in Wanderer or even Alhaitham teams, for example, Furina is even better. She enables superior gearing on top of providing bigger damage percent bonuses to the entire team. Remember, you don't even necessarily need a team-wide healer for Furina to be superior to the other options. Shinobu, for example, can consistently solo carry the healing needed for all Hyper Bloom teams. You may not full stack Fanfare immediately, which many mistakenly assume to be necessary. It doesn't actually matter. Furina is better anyway as long as your team benefits from talent damage buffs, which, if your team is good, probably should. Believe it or not, Furina actually comes with certain quality of life benefits. Her E-skill not only has a ludicrously long uptime, it is also completely autonomous. You will no longer be required to weave normal attacks to achieve optimal damage. And since she absolutely forces you to use a healer, you may find her teams more comfortable than forcing healerless Xingqiu teams, for example. Do keep in mind, however, that Furina technically applies Hydro slower than both Yelan and Xingqiu. While this isn't a big deal at all in most teams, you will not be able to enable Hu Tao to vape all of her charge attacks, so Yelan is still the go-to there. And in teams that heavily rely on transformative reactions, with nobody really doing talent damage, then Xingqiu would be the superior choice, due to his higher Hydro application and thus more blooms. All in all, Furina is a monster in all regards, despite her apparent gameplay drawbacks, which I do believe to be overstated. With all the major differences between the three out of the way, I want to emphasize that there is absolutely nothing stopping you from using any pair of them together in the same team. In fact, double Hydro teams are some of the strongest compositions you can make. I want to specifically point out that Yelan plus Furina plus a healer is significantly more damage than anything else, and doing that also frees up Xingqiu for the other side, if you care about that. That said, if your other team absolutely demands Yelan or Furina, Xingqiu is still an incredible option that you can use for double Hydro teams. Xingqiu has one of the best 4-star Constellation suites in the game, and that can be a double-edged sword. On one hand, you gain significant benefits from acquiring his Constellations, but that also means a lower Constellation Xingqiu is a shadow of his C6 self. As it stands, a C0 Yelan will be better than a C5 Xingqiu damage-wise in every single situation. That said, however, Xingqiu is technically fully functional at C2, and that can be more accessible than waiting for a limited 5-star to come back on banner. As for Yelan and Furina, they have the two strongest 5-star Constellation suites in all of Genshin. If you have any number of their constellations and are not playing teams that require all three off-field Hydro units, I hope to god your Xingqiu isn't getting much playtime. If you really miss his interruption resistance, just swap out another team member for Zhongli or some shit. There are some way too base takes on this topic recently that I really don't want to get into. All three of these beloved off-field Hydro characters are absolutely amazing units, and you should probably try to get all three as soon as possible. While Xingqiu will forever be the best comfort pick, I do believe that as of now, Both Yelan and especially Furina are greater priorities in team building than him to grant most players with the most success. If I had to do a tier list, all three of them would be near the top of S tier, with Furina, Yelan, and then Xingqiu going from left to right. At the end of the day, the Abyss is a game mode with 2 sides and 8 separate team slots. There is absolutely nothing stopping you from using all 3 siblings at the same time, and that could honestly be the optimal way of clearing for many accounts. So the comparison is honestly whatever at the end of the day. All 3 of them are good, you should use all of them. Anyway, that's all for today.